So our next meeting for environment and sustainability is on Earth Day, April 22nd by Zoom. And we're really going to highlight all of the natural spaces in San Mateo County. We are lucky to be in a county with amazing open spaces. And we had a long list of organizations that we could invite. We narrowed it down to 11 influential open space preservation organizations who are going to talk about their goals, their programs, and their successes. It's a fantastic way to celebrate Earth Day, to celebrate locally about our own natural lands. So now I'd like to move into today's program. So first of all, I would like to recognize all the elected representatives in the room. And I have to be honest that I'm not quite sure who they are. So if you want to raise your hand, we really appreciate that you're here. It's really important to have this cross-sector collaboration. And so we appreciate having electeds in the room as well as everybody from the government side. So I'd also really like to just do a big shout out to Doug Silverstein and Rebecca Townsend, because they are really the Thrive brainchilds behind it. I'm really the figurehead on this one. They've done all of the work. They've spent months researching water, and it's been a huge learning journey for them. And they've really pulled together an amazing group of people, and with a really good partnership with Sustainable Pescadero. And I'm just really impressed with what they've been able to do, and super grateful to them and to the Thrive staff. By creating this opportunity, we're hoping that to move this conversation forward as much as we can. We know this is a difficult conversation, and we really appreciate everyone being in the room for it. At this point, I want to hand it over to Irma Rodriguez Mitton, who's the CEO and EcoDistrict's AP of Fruition Sustainable Solutions. Among her education and accomplishments, she has received an English literature degree from Stanford, Sustainable Building Advisor accreditation from the SBA Institute, California Sustainable Wine Growing Ambassador Certificate from the California Wine Institute, and clearly she wears many hats. Most importantly for us today, she's a leader of Sustainable Pescadero. She practices her commitment locally to promoting better stewardship of our local resources in San Mateo County, including earth, water, energy, animals, and people. And across all of her work, she promotes her belief that technology and intelligence can restore our environment and advance civil societies. We're very grateful for her partnership, and I'm going to turn it over to her now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Petra. And I want to second that we are very, very grateful for the support of Thrive, and Doug and Rebecca for helping us put together this presentation. And it came about because last fall, Sustainable Pescadero was doing some work with the County Office of Sustainability on their climate action plan. We talked about we talked about energy, we talked about transportation, we talked about recycling, and we didn't talk about water and wastewater. And residents said, hey, wait a minute, we need to have a conversation about water and wastewater. Go back just a second, Kirsten, thanks. So I really am grateful for Thrive for enabling us to put this forum together for our residents here on the South Coast. A little bit about Sustainable Pescadero. We are an informal collaborative of residents, business owners, community-based organizations who recognize that there are common threads throughout all the issues that we care about and that we're working on, whether that's safer streets or a stronger economy, maintaining our agricultural lands, maintaining our open spaces. The common theme is we're all working to make sure our community is healthy and resilient and has the resources it needs to take care of ourselves. So we get together, again, this is an informal group. We get together the first Wednesday of every month at 4 o'clock, 4 to 5:30. It's open to the community, and we are sharing information and supporting each other on whatever initiatives we have going. If you'd like to get informed of the agenda or just get the meeting notes, you can go to our website and sign up for our email list. We send out 2 emails a month, so it won't overwhelm your inbox. So please join us. Our next meeting is coming up on April 7th. Okay, next slide. So as Petra said, this is a very, very big topic. And we recognize that we are probably not going to solve it all today. Not only is water itself a complex topic, but it's particularly complex here on the South Coast, where we have such a diversity of water systems, from individual wells to small scale systems that serve just a few houses to the county supported service districts. So this makes it very, very difficult for us to assess the real levels of risk, as well as making it difficult to take action towards mitigating those risks or improving our system. So this panel is really geared toward opening up this conversation to shed light on what's the real situation in terms of quality, scarcity, our infrastructure needs. What can we really do to ensure that everyone on the coast doesn't have to be concerned about water quality or water quantity? And most importantly, how do we empower all of us, all of our communities, to work together? Because each of us is it's difficult for each of us to do it alone. So that's the premise that we are going to examine today. We asked some questions. Next slide, Kirsten. We asked some questions of registrants before the event about their top concerns about water quality, and I won't read all of this, but you can see some people are concerned whether water is actually safe to drink, and would like to install perhaps a filtration system. And they're concerned about keeping the infrastructure up to date. Next slide. We had some general concerns about water availability, specifically not having an alternative if your water source fails due to drought or any other natural disasters. And if anybody who has experienced the public safety power shutoffs that we had last year, where if your well runs on electricity, many of them do, that if they're not gravity fed, that means when you don't have power, you don't have fresh water. So that's a concern for many people on the coast. And just looking for more technical information on other ways to manage water. Next slide. We also asked a little bit concerns about septic systems, because where you have water, you also have wastewater, and it is one ecosystem. So interesting that many people would like just more information about how to manage and monitor their own septic system, so that they can be a little more assured that what they're discharging into the system is not harmful. So those were just some general concerns. Again, we're not going to get to all of this today, but it gives us a really good background for conversation, and it also gives us some follow up on and bring more information to the community. So a word about our format. We're going to have each of our panelists speak for a few minutes on their particular area, and then we'll open it up to questions. So if you have a question, maybe note it down, and we will ask you to raise your hands when we come back to the Q&A section at about 4:15. And we'll certainly hope to get as many answers as we can. Go ahead. We're going to, next slide, Kirsten. We're going to begin with Kellyx Nelson, the Executive Director of the San Mateo County Resource Conservation District. Calyx and her team of scientists are in the field every day out here gathering direct data. So I'm certainly looking forward to hearing about what Calyx has to say about water on the South Coast.
Thank you, Irma. Thanks, Thrive, and Doug and Rebecca for your work to pull this forum together. This is going to be super brief, so let me just say I have about 5 minutes, and just know that there's probably hours of information we could provide on this, so feel free to follow up. The Resource Conservation District, for those of you who aren't super familiar, is a form of local government that helps people help the land. We're a non-regulatory agency that works where we're invited to help you in the community with what your priorities are. Because of that, these program areas are the ones that we currently have to deliver on the priorities that have been identified by the community. And you'll see that one of our primary programs has to do with water resources, water conservation, water availability, water resource management, water quality, water pollution, etc. And we've been doing this actually for a little over 80 years in San Mateo County. So next slide, please. So just to sort of frame this issue a little bit, on the South Coast, farms, fish, people, wildlife all depend on the same water resource. And on the coast, particularly south of Half Moon Bay, there's no intertie with any state water project. So there's no connection with snowpack or anything like that. There's no utility. People a few miles as the crow flies to the east are often amazed to find out there is no water utility here. There's no irrigation district. It's very complex geology and groundwater profile, and there's a lot that's not really known. And water is seasonal, and it's very limited, and everybody's depending on that same water. And low stream flows threaten wildlife, domestic and agricultural water supply. And that domestic supply includes the homes, the residences, as well as visitors. So there's a number of campgrounds in the watershed as well. Next slide. Thanks. So a little bit about what we're doing about that. The RCD, with support, significant support from San Mateo County and state and federal funders of resources, we've probably invested upwards, I'm going to say about maybe $14 million in recent years on improvements having to do with water resources and water management in the South Coast. And by the South Coast, I'm largely meaning San Gregorio and Pescadero watersheds. So Cuesta La Honda to San Gregorio, Loma Mar down to downtown Pescadero. We've worked with farmers on building reservoir. Oh, can you go back? Thanks. Worked with farmers on building ponds, reservoirs to store water and get them off the creek when the flow is really low for coho salmon, and to balance that so that there's downstream flow. Irrigation efficiency, water conservation. The photo on the upper right is a system we put in for the Loma Mar Mutual Water Company. The lower right is one we put on Dan Schaefer's property in downtown Pescadero. Some of you knew Dan. And some of that, and then the upper left photo is some of the water quality monitoring that we do, a lot of that. And I'd be happy to speak to some of the concerns in that survey specifically about whether or not we're finding them to be a concern, or what one might do about it, or what you could do about your septics or what have you. And then we've done a great deal of work around water resource assessment. What are the demands? What are the needs? What are the projected demands? What information remains to be known? Including having installed on Harley Farms an irrigation management information system, a CIMIS station that provides very high tech, very hyper local data that's information about essentially about water use and water availability. Now you can go to the next slide. You can, I don't know, take a print screenshot, take a picture of this with your phone or something like that. If you'd like to know more, you can follow up with me, go to our webpage or any of our social media. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Calyx. We are going to move now we're going to hear from Dave Damrosch, who is a longtime resident of the Dearborn area of Pescadero and one of the co-managers of the Dearborn Spring Water System. Dave?
You're on mute, Dave.
Dave, you're still on mute. Maybe the host can unmute you.
How's that? Is that better?
There you go. Yep.
I was apologizing for scripting my intro. This is for your protection because us old geezers tend to ramble just a little bit. Good afternoon, and I'm Dave Damrosch. My wife Judy and I have managed the Dearborn Spring Water System now for the better part of the last 30 years. I believe we're here to help represent small rural water systems in our county. The basic infrastructure of our system is probably 80 to 90 years old. Dearborn Spring Water System became a named entity in 1998 as a party to an easement agreement with Pesky Ranch and Peninsula Open Space Trust, allowing us defined access to 3 springs that are the source of our water supply. Dearborn Spring Water System was granted a state small water system supply permit from San Mateo County Environmental Health Department in 2012. For those of you who don't know what a state small water system is, here are some quotes from SMC Health's website. The State Water Board Drinking Water Division oversees large water systems that provide drinking water for most of the public. San Mateo County Environmental Health regulates smaller systems under the State Small Water Systems Program. The definition is forthcoming. A state small water system is a system that serves water to 5 to 14 service connections and fewer than 25 people daily for at least 60 days out of a year. There appear to be 9 state small water systems regulated by our county, and they're all on the west side of Skyline and thus dependent on our watershed. Kirsten, next slide if you would. There you go. Oh, that's great. That's both of them. I don't know if you guys can see it on the left-hand side, but that's a Widowmaker that managed to find my neighbor's water tank. 90% of our system's infrastructure is above ground. The 2 obvious liabilities of such a system are 1, damage to the system by falling tree parts, and 2, next slide, if you would, Kirsten, entire trees falling on it. Obviously, fire is the most serious liability that we have, and it has the potential to take out everything in our system except the springs. Believe it or not, this line that you see running under the tree continued to work and works to this day, bless its little heart. So we haven't messed with it. Let's see, okay. Advantages of our system, however, include ease of repair. Our customers are extremely aware of their water system and engaged in its monitoring. Those who are physically able know how to mitigate and or repair a broken line. There's also a visible and clearly defined separation between potable and septic water systems. Last year, we delivered nearly 150,000 gallons of safe drinking water during 365 days of uninterrupted service, including the 3-week evac for the CZU fires, to 12 service connections. All periodic tests for bacteria, disinfectant byproducts, etc., were satisfactory, as was a non-routine post-fire nitrate test requested by the county. Average water use per person was about 1/3 the national average. This water was delivered through roughly 2,000 feet of water line, which, because of a 300-foot elevation change, had line pressures varying from 3 to 90 psi. The system is entirely gravity fed, uses no electricity or fossil fuels. Depending on how you define them, there are also less than a dozen moving parts, 2 of which are Judy and I. Of the water we capture from 2 primary and 1 seasonal spring, as much as half of it is directly returned untreated to the watershed. We use a batch treatment protocol that allows us to keep chlorine concentrations below 1 part per million. And all treated water goes to well-maintained septic systems at our service connections. And there you have the Dearborn Spring Water System. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dave. That's a great insight into a very small scale water system that works for those 12 neighbors working together to manage, and obviously are very, very aware of the amount of water they're consuming, because 1/3 the national average is certainly pretty spectacular. Next slide, Kirsten. Next up, we have Heather McAvoy, who is with the CSA 7 County,
Hello.
County Service Area 7, which serves some of the La Honda area. And I know that Heather and her committee has been working on lots of issues that we're love to hear about.
Sure. Thanks for having me. CSA 7, as you mentioned, is in La Honda. Can I have the next slide, please? That's a pretty picture. Thanks for making my slides look better. So I'm joining you today primarily to ensure that the La Honda area is a part of conversations about and solutions to regional water quality, supply, and affordability. So some of the issues that face La Honda in general are going to be similar to other South Coast communities. We have a lack of reliable water supply for our commercial center. This is where our post office, our Market Puente's office, and our closed restaurant are. This has been a chronic issue that needs a community solution. We need regional solutions to persistent issues of water availability, affordability, and quality. And this, we're just part of at CSA 7, we're just a piece of a big puzzle. And Dave's description of the system in Dearborn was very illustrative of that fact. There's other water systems in La Honda, the largest of which is the Cuesta La Honda Guild. Redwood Terrace has a water system, and then there's others even smaller. Everything in the San Gregorio stream system, all of the water rights have fully appropriated as part of the 1993 final decree. So any solutions that we come to have to take that decree into account. Next slide, please. Okay, so County Service Area number 7, like CSA 11 in Pescadero, we're operated by San Mateo County Public Works. The committee I represent are customers who represent these neighborhoods. We're mostly in the west part of La Honda. Our system also supplies Camp Glenwood Boys Ranch, which is currently closed, and Sam McDonald Park. And our system consists of an intake and pump in Alpine Creek, a water treatment plant and storage in Sam McDonald Park that was built in the 90s. And then we have a kind of a hodgepodge distribution system, some of which is over 100 years old. Our infrastructure is desperately in need of replacement. And I want to give a shout out to Don Horsley and his office for being very attentive to this issue and other issues throughout his constituency. The cost of meeting increasingly dense state regulatory requirements is an issue. Reliability of our surface water source in both drought and flood, lack of economies of scale, and the overhead costs. And I also want to point out that some parts of La Honda can be perceived as rather affluent. We have a dearth of affordable housing. One of our affordable housing locations is the trailer park, La Honda Park, and CSA 7 provides potable water to those folks. So if you have any questions about CSA 7, my contact information is here. And thanks for allowing me to be a part of this conversation. And I look forward to listening and learning more about these initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. And you raised some important questions about the economics of water systems here in a rural area, in a vulnerable area, and just how we fund those infrastructure improvements when we don't have a centralized economies of scale. Our next speaker Peter Haas with Sherwood Design Engineers is actually very experienced in small community water systems and wastewater systems. And he's going to present some ideas for management strategies in Pescadero. And we're really delighted that Peter is here to share his insights with us. Thanks, Peter.
Thanks, Irma. Thanks for inviting me to participate this afternoon. Yeah, I was just thinking, I've been working on water and, both water supply and wastewater systems over 35 years now in the Santa Cruz Mountains. So for a little bit of a while, and I'm glad that this continues to be, a subject of discussion. It's amazing how sometimes how long things take to go from a concept to fruition. And I've been fortunate to work on work with a lot of the small water companies, around Pescadero and in the Santa Cruz Mountains in San Mateo County, and hopefully solve problems and not create too many. I have attended over the last, I want to think 10 years, I've been participating in an ongoing conversation with the town of Pescadero, starting with being asked to review a plan to put sewers in and put a centralized treatment system in for the town, probably over 10 years ago. And at that time, we gave some recommendations. I gave some recommendations to the town. And then more recently, I've been invited to attend some of the sustainable Pescadero afternoon sessions. I think I've been over the last 3 years to probably two of them. So today I just have, it's a 5-minute talk. So I have two really simple concepts that these were takeaways from the last time I met with sustainable Pescadero. So let's go to the next slide, which is, there was brought to my attention that the desire to see if there was a way to get some laundry facilities in town. There's a lot of community members that don't have access to basic services. And so, I won't get into a lot of details, but the town, it's challenged with having, new wastewater systems or new growth. So I wanted to plant this seed, and we can talk about it later if you want, which is the idea of going to a zero discharge option. And bear in mind, I'm not promoting this company, Aqua Recycle, but they do sell systems. So I just needed to show you a sample. Like, this is not pie in the sky. There are systems available where you would actually do a closed loop laundry water recycling system. And it could be done. I mean, this doesn't, the cost I'm showing right now is probably, to support a system that could probably handle up to 6,000 to 12,000 gallons per day. So quite a bit of laundry washing. They're pretty efficient because your water reduction, you're saving a lot of water cost by recycling, and your energy cost is actually recovered because you're taking hot water back through the system as opposed to starting with cold water, heating it up and running it through. So, this is something that's deployed. It's been used throughout the Bay Area, throughout California. So it's not novel, it's not unique. And I would believe there's probably some grant monies available if the community could sell it as a community-based project. So I just wanted to throw that concept out, and we can go to the next slide real quick. This is the original project that I reviewed probably, I want to say 10 years ago by a different consulting firm. They were tasked, they were given a difficult task, which was to come up with a centralized wastewater project for the central downtown area. And I think the challenge that they face is a lot of the facilities that they were trying to put into play were going to be situated on county lands because those lands were available. It would reduce the cost of having to buy land. But what it resulted in is a very expensive project because a lot of the facilities were very remote from the downtown, the center of the town of Pescadero. So one of my feedback was, well, why can't we bring things closer and, really consolidate. And so the notion I have shared with some members of the community, and I wanted to share to this group, was, there is, it's not a complex project. It's about putting in a fairly simple sewer system. And then what I find exciting is that there is some opportunity. There's some pretty big water users right on the outskirts of town. I mean, this is 30 acres of greenhouses. So one can imagine the amount of water that's being used at that facility. And so I tend to think there's some synergy there. I tend to think there's an opportunity for water reclamation to happen really close to town, which I think may make it as an affordable option. And I know there's some other water reclamation projects being entertained or being reviewed. So I don't know if this aligns with those or if this is pie in the sky, but I just want to at least present it as a concept, and we can come back to it later. And that's all I've got. Thanks, Irma.
Thank you so much, Peter. It's nice to see solutions. I understand that these are just ideas and examples, but it's important for us to consider innovations and what's possible. So we appreciate you presenting those. We're going to talk about another solution right now with NuLeaf technology, and we have Rachel Major and Ari Ochoa joining us.
Hello, thanks for having us. So we are NuLeaf Tech, and we build compact ecosystems for off-grid water. Water is life. For Californians, water scarcity is an issue that hits close to home. So we would hope that we are doing everything we can to bolster our wastewater treatment technologies. But next slide, please. But unfortunately, the American Society of Civil Engineers actually rates the US's wastewater infrastructure as a D+. And this is largely due to many dilapidated and aging technologies. On-grid treatment plants are really common, but they're expensive. And across the US, they dump over 850 billion gallons of raw sewage into the US's waterways each year. The smallest can run $500,000 for construction alone, which is pretty steep for like a small community like the South Coast. For off-grid treatment options, the most common are septic tanks. However, the bare minimum treatment that these systems provide can become hazardous if they are neglected. And neglect can become common when repair can cost $30,000 or more. Their large leach fields also limit construction for utilities and industry and housing. And in the South Coast, they are limiting housing. So in 2017, my co-founder, Ari Ochoa, and I were working at NASA Ames to build resource smart technologies inspired by nature. And we were really struck by how many wastewater solutions really only cater to large civil engineering projects or corporations. So we wanted to give people self-determination to treat their wastewater on site. Next slide, please. So we created the NuTree. So ecological solutions are available for wastewater treatment, such as reed beds, but they are quite large. So you can think of a NuTree as a constructed wetland that fits in your garden, but also has modular units so you can scale for a small farmer. And a NuTree a single NuTree unit can treat 350 gallons a day of wastewater from a wide variety of sources without odor. The process starts in the engineering wetland basin, where a bioreactor aerates and churns the wastewater, and wetland bacteria start to break down the waste. And this liquid fertilizer is then further used, cleaned by various plants in that vertical farming terrace. The unit takes less than 100 watts, and we hope one day to make it energy neutral with renewable energy that also further cleans the water. And at about $5,000 a unit, we are cost competitive with septic tanks, and these can be made even cheaper by having a little bit less of a focus on aesthetics. So in research settings, we were able to remove over 99% of BOD and TSS contaminants from heavily contaminated wastewater from breweries. Due to COVID, we focused more on residential sewage, and we're seeking funds to do research at the Codiga lab at Stanford University to help us determine eligibility for NSF 40 certification, which is one of the requirements for on-site treatment devices in San Mateo County. We're waiting to hear back from a grant for greywater recycling to determine if the NuTree can help to treat laundry water with detergent so that more of that water can be reused. We're also open to using NuTrees to decrease nitrogen pollution, so small farmers can increase their yields. And so we're a new technology. We know that we are at an early technological stage, but we are one of the few companies that really focuses on creating an affordable solution for these small communities. So if you want to support us in other ways, we also have what's called NuTree bonsais, little trees that don't treat wastewater, but they can help enhance your home, business, or school garden. And the two biggest struggles we've seen as a new wastewater technology are definitely regulation and lack of awareness about the problem. For example, septic tanks are considered to be in peak condition when they remove less than 30% of contaminants, but NSF 40 certification requires over 90% contaminant removal. So certification takes time, it's expensive, and so we feel there must be something in between to either provide additional treatment for septic tanks to help make their leach fields smaller, or something to tackle that gap between 30% and 90% where people's livelihoods are suffering. Also, not a lot of people know how badly our wastewater infrastructure is struggling. And this is likely because the people with the means to fix this problem are also the least likely to be impacted by it. VC, venture capital, and university funding is a common way to get started, but these institutions are not accessible for everyone, nor do they have a lot of drive to fix issues that hit hard in rural communities. But small communities across the nation add up in a really big way. And soon these wastewater problems are going to affect all of us without distinction. And the biggest difference is that some people will be able to pay to make these issues go away as individual residents and others won't. But we would like to change that. And we hope that you will help us pave that path. So thank you for having us. And my co-founder is on the call as well. He'll be there for the panels. So, but thank you. Oh, next slide, please. That has my contact information. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Rachel and Ari, for presenting that. And you did address some key questions about the way wastewater is, the way we treat wastewater perhaps has lots of room for improvement. And what are the first steps we need to take to address that problem? Now we get to move to the government perspective with our Honorable Supervisor, Don Horsley, our District 3 Supervisor, who will give us his view from the county's point of view on water.
Well, thanks, Irma. Actually, I don't have any really interesting slides. I have one. If you would go to the next slide, just to give you an example of basically the departments that are really involved in the South Coast that could be of assistance. One is the Office of Sustainability, and the other is Environmental Health. And anybody with a well is certainly been in contact with environmental health. But I thought what I would, rather than talk about things like wastewater treatment, because obviously you have experts on here. I'm not an expert, but I thought I'd give you like a really quick thumbnail sketch of what we've done with CSA 11, which is essentially a water system managed by the county. Now, Heather already gave you whoops, phone's coming in. An analysis of, let me turn this thing off. I have an Apple Watch and I have a cell phone, and the Apple Watch is going and it's down, so same thing. In any case, with CSA 11 is, it is a water system. It is it's an aquifer. And somewhere about 7 years ago, when I was in my, I think I was in my maybe second term of office, maybe the first term of office, we had a failure at CSA 11. It basically, the whole town was out water. There's a grand total of about 90 connections. And we thought, because we knew about this, an earlier report called the Todd report that indicated that the aquifer had a limited lifespan of somewhere in the neighborhood of about 20 additional years. And so I was thinking, oh my God, why did this happen on my watch? What am I going to do now with the town of Pescadero? But it turned out that what had happened was that the aquifer had been dropping and the pump burned out. And unfortunately, the alarm that we had on the system had been turned off by our Department of Public Works because it kept on going off and they didn't fix it. And in that particular, the weekend before this happened, there had been a festival in Pescadero, and so the water tank was completely drained. Then obviously our pump burned out, and we had to then shut down the whole system for a period of time, go through water boils and all that, and the town was, of course, really, justifiably angry at us. So we had to essentially fix that problem. And how we fixed it is, we made some improvements to the well itself, to the design of the well, and we just dropped the pump a little bit lower. And we knew, again, the well is actually declining. At the same time, we were also becoming aware of the fact that there was a problems with the water at the high school. And there wasn't much we could do because we thought, at least at that point, that CSA 11 had really a very limited life cycle. So in any case, what we did is my office, I think it was Nicholas Calderon, now runs our Parks Department, and Sarah Rosendahl. We worked with a consultant and we got the town listed as what's called a DAC, a disadvantaged community, which made us eligible for grants from, I guess it was Prop 68. In that case, we got a grant for about $700,000, which is about half of the cost of drilling a new well. It's sort of interesting how we did the new well is that we had, the experts go up to the well site and they dug a well and unfortunately came up kind of not exactly dry, but wasn't very good. And we then had somebody from the town who was a water witch who found a better site. And so we found another, I don't know if it's a different aquifer or the same aquifer, just a different part of it, but we dropped another well into that part of the aquifer and found that water was our expected life expanse or life expanse of that aquifer somewhere in the neighborhood of, they estimate 99 years, whether it's 110 or 92, I don't know, but I know that it's a significant amount. So that once we did that, then we decided, well, because of the problems that we're having at the high school, and we also want to move the fire station because it really isn't a floodplain. And even though Calyx has done some outstanding work in the marsh, we're not convinced that that is a permanent solution. And it still is a floodplain. And so we want, and the other thing is that the fire station is full of mold. It doesn't, newer engines are bigger, longer, taller, and firefighters, they don't like backing up. So we're going to build a new fire station. We're going to build it on the site of the high school. We did, with our Office of Sustainability, look to see if there was an aquifer on the high school site. So we knew they had a well, but it was a problem with the wells. It has significant contamination, and they have never been able to get control and treatment. And so it really basically was shut down, and the kids are given bottled water supplied by the state, by State Water Resources Control Board. So in any case, we dug another well on the side of the high school, thinking that, well, maybe we'll find an adequate well and we can treat it and provide water both to our fire station and the school. And in any case, the well turned out to have only about 1.5 gallons a minute, which you couldn't even run a household on. And not only that, it has significant contamination. And I don't remember exactly what, but I'm pretty sure there were pretty high incidents of nitrates. So in that case, the other part of the equation that really is difficult is that because of the LCP, local coastal plan, because of the rural urban boundary, and because of the fact that the high school is not within the sphere of, is beyond the rural urban boundary, we were concerned that we would have to go to a countywide election to allow us to move that water pipe down to the high school. We did some additional research, looked at the original legislation, and I have to say, proud of myself as I discovered, wait a second, I think we can just ask for an LCP amendment. So that's what we're pursuing, but we also have it working with the state of California, the Water Resources Control Board, because essentially they're the ones who wanted to consolidate small water systems. And we're looking at this as a consolidation of a small water system. And so Ellie Dahlman, who is, I'm sure she's on this call, she's now the staff person. And we've had another staff person who's out on maternity leave, but Ellie is working on, and I think the last I saw it, we have the engineering is about 30% completed. And I think we're just about ready to go to the Coastal Commission asking for the LCP amendment. Once we get the LCP amendment, if it's approved by the Coastal Commission, I can't see why it would not, because we are not generating additional development. And that's really the thrust of the issue, that so the water line that will go from the end of current CSA 11 to the high school will pass right by some homes. They will not be allowed to tap into that system. That would be considered encouraging development, and we then would have to go, that would necessitate going to a countywide election, and we certainly don't want to do that. So in any case, and then after we get an LCP, then we have to go to LAFCO, because CSA 11 has a specific boundary, and we have to ask, and I'm sure we'll get it, I'm sure that LAFCO will allow us to extend the boundary of CSA 11 to the high school to provide water to the high school, as well as to the fire station. It has taken way more time than I would like. I think we make things in California way more complicated, and I regret that we haven't been able to move a lot faster. But it just gives you an example of the difficulties. And I know I will leave it at that. I think that's my time is up.
Thank you, Supervisor. That was a very useful explanation of some of the challenges of supplying our town with ample water, and which is, of course, the lifeblood of the downtown district with CSA 11, and it just speaks to some of the challenges we have that maybe other cities around in the peninsula don't think about. What I'd like to do now, and that is open it up for questions to any of our panelists. If you have a specific question, I don't know if we have the raise hand feature, but you can also put your question in chat, and I will call on you. One of the first questions, I'll kick it off, is for Calyx. If people have concerns about water quality, what's the first step?
Well, presumably you mean drinking water quality.
Drinking water quality, yes.
Well, I mean, it depends on what their concern is, but just, you can call us. You can call us, you can email us, you can ping us, we'll answer you. And if it's not something that we can help with, we'll know who can. There's things that the county can help with, and there's things that we can help with. Right now, we've had a program, some of you may have received, we had partnered with Puente because we understood drinking water quality to be a concern of some folks in the South Coast. We had partnered with Puente to offer a program where we can provide free water quality testing kits and then assess your results. And Puente had put flyers in some of the food distribution, and also sent out text blasts to a few hundred people, and only 2 asked us for it. So if there's another way, or if maybe the folks that we were reaching aren't the ones that are concerned, or maybe there's something we did wrong, if we can do it better, or if there's other partners in addition that can help get the word out, we have the resources available to help people test their water quality right now.
Thank you. I think that's information that will be helpful to everyone, and we'll make sure we start sharing it, getting you some new contacts out there.
You know, Irma, may I note that some of the things in the survey that I saw were of concern to people, I think are not huge concerns that we've seen, just to be clear about that. So for example, one of the things was about like lead in water. If people are concerned about lead in their drinking water, go online and order a $7 kit from Bed Bath & Beyond or something like that. It's really easy to check for lead in your water. But if your pipes were, if your house or the infrastructure is from more recent than like the 40s or 50s, chances are probably pretty low. And some of the things that, there are some really simple things people can do. I saw there were some people who were concerned maybe about septics. The RCD can put together an FAQ to send people about, or put out to the communities of the South Coast about, you know, what are simple ways to do visual inspections of your septics, and what are other resources? Where can the county help you? What are funding resources, et cetera? There are some things that people can do. A lot of this is online as well. And then we have done some water quality monitoring and not seen some big concerns in the creeks that would indicate any large scale human inputs of like bacteria or anything like that. So just want to give people a flag about that. And then the very little bit of monitoring we've done from the folks who did respond for testing the drinking water, we didn't see any nitrates or nitrites yet. I know that it's in the high school, but we haven't seen it otherwise.
All great information. So it seems that perhaps water quality, if you haven't seen a lot of evidence for that, I know a lot of concern that also seems to be running through the answers and is water quantity, or the lack of water, especially for water systems that are fed from the creeks. And, you know, Heather, I would like to just address to you the CSA 7, since I believe you said it draws from
Alpine Creek. Yes.
Alpine Creek. So how do you people in the Honda prepare for drier seasons? And
we have 2 issues because our system has surface water. One is, of course, in drought. In the last drought a few years ago, they kept needing to move the water intake, and because the creek kept getting lower and lower. And then the other weather scenario that gives us a big problem is that when we have a lot of water in the creek and it's too turbid to pump out of the creek. And in those cases, CSA 7, the county has had water trucked in to serve our community, or our part of the La Honda community. And of course, that's very expensive and not very sustainable. So that's one of the big issues. We're with some funding that has been found for us. There's been a feasibility study to find an alternative source, so we're not dependent on a single source of water. Cuesta La Honda Guild has multiple sources of water, and so they are currently, as I understand it, under some water supply stress, that they're conserving water, but that their system is much more complicated, and they have impoundments, they have reservoirs, and they have limitations on which, they have some groundwater sources too, but limitations as to what time of year they can pump from which source. So it's very complex.
Heather, for both, this question is for both Heather and Dave. Are your connections to the homes metered? That is just, does every homeowner or resident have an idea of their particular water usage?
Speaking for CSA 7, yes, there's a meter for every customer, and our billing is quarterly. They read the meters and bill us quarterly, and that actually is a cost savings. They used to bill monthly, and in order to save cost, they now bill us quarterly. And but we do get a meter read.
And Dave, if you're with us, how is the Dearborn Springs water
En
allocated?
Dearborn Springs, en el manantial de Dearborn, nosotros tenemos medidas en el área este y el área oeste. Uno sirve a 4 hogares, otro a 6 o 7.
Mainly water consumption is social pressure. There's a significant amount up here. So, and we know when someone's up for the weekend, and we know when a grandfather has brought a inflatable swimming pool for the grandkids, and it's a small community. So if we have a high user, we don't need to meter them to know. And the billing is fixed. It's based on a zero sum. In other words, all of our costs are estimated for the year, divided by the number of hookups, and that's the bill for the year. If it comes in less, they get a refund.
Okay. I'd like to remind everybody that if you do have any questions, you can put your questions in the chat. I'm not actually seeing any raised hands, and I'm not sure if we have that capability or not. TJ, is that a raised hand? Or, I'm sorry. Was that Bridget? Did you have your hand up? Nope. Okay. I'm wondering if any of our panelists can offer suggestions for, Supervisor Horsley talked about not the well pump failing on the town water supply. And I know I've had my own experience of, we didn't know our water filter was not functioning until I got very sick because I was drinking water with too much iron in it. So are there good solutions for monitoring your well, the health of your well, beyond water quality, monitoring the amount that's in it, or what are some practices around that? And do any of the panelists have ideas for that?
Yeah, I mean, if you're able to measure water levels in your well periodically, at least a couple times a year is a good idea. And then I was going to say iron and manganese are really common problems throughout Santa Cruz Mountains. And then a lot of the plants, whether it's Cuesta La Honda, Memorial Park, we've done a lot of surface water treatment plants, just to deal with potential for waterborne pathogens, which are common, whether it's Giardia. But I think, observing, your quality, just looking at, especially iron, you usually can see when you have breakthrough on a filter, you're starting to see the change of color in toilets and stuff. Some things, there's visual cues you can use usually to understand if things are working properly or not.
And are there resources at the county level or elsewhere for homeowners who would need maybe assistance in repairing wells or installing filtration systems or?
Irma, just so you know, there's somebody who has their hand up too.
Okay.
But I could take a little bit of a stab at this. There are different types of funding sources for different things. There's the USDA's Rural Economic Development Program has some funding. Sometimes the State Water Resources Control Board does. These are often very low interest loans, not grants. The rural economic development ones can function more like grants. You know, Supervisor Horsley or other folks here from the county can speak to any county programs about that, with which I'm not familiar. And then in Pescadero and San Gregorio watersheds, the good news is that anything that has to do with efficient use of water or water conservation or wise water resource management is fisheries restoration. And so the way that we were able to get funds to help repair the impoundment, the reservoir for Cuesta La Honda Guild, or the Lomamar project, or some of the other domestic systems. I think we've done, maybe worked on 5 or 6 domestic systems at this point, has been through these state programs that are often tied to fisheries restoration. Because as I said, it's the same water for farms, fish, and people. So funding programs that are about the human right to water, funding programs that are about agricultural viability, and funding programs that are about fisheries restoration are often the same projects that are about the wise management of the resource.
And Irma, if I might add something, one of the sort of the disadvantage of the county is that we are regulatory. So you ask us to take a look at your well, you could end up being red tag. So I don't think people are really going to be looking at us, but I do know that there are grants. The State Resources Control Board, they won't give a grant to individuals, but they would conceivably to CSA 11 for CSA 11 to monitor. But you know, if I was going to recommend to people to take a look at or test their water, I would really suggest going to RCD, because they are not regulatory. And I think personally, that's a safer way to go. I was going to also add something about talking about lead. Lead can get into your water, but it's usually from, you know, the solder that was used at one time on copper pipes many years ago. And I know, I think Calyx already said that there have been traces of lead at the high school, and we may end up having to repipe the whole high school. But there's also not only traces of lead, but also traces of copper, which means that if you have an individual well and it's not properly maintained, it is possible to also have traces of copper as well. And I don't know about the solder. I think that modern solders or connectivity is no longer has lead in it. But if you have a really old system, it is possible, as those systems get older, that it's possible to have potential small amounts of lead.
So it also has a lot to do with the aggressivity of the water, you know. So
yeah.
Fortunately, we live in an area where most of the water we're using is pretty hard, you know, and you see a lot of calcium deposits on fixtures and on your pipes, and that has a tendency to actually, you know, reduce the amount of things leaching into the water, such as, you know, joint solder, you know, old solder. And so we don't, fortunately, in the West Coast, see a lot of issues around copper and lead, but a new pipe system, a brand new system, is more prone to it rather than an old system, because it usually doesn't have the deposits on it. And so you will see some residual copper and things like that show up. But again, it really depends on, you know, the nature of the water. So sometimes groundwater can be, you know, if it's a shallow well, can be a little aggressive, you know, but if that's helpful. I was going to say I know there are some organizations in Calyx, you may know this, like I know Trout Unlimited has been doing some projects to help rural homeowners, if they're using surface waters, get at, you know, reduce the amount of water they're pulling out of creeks, and funding some storage projects. I was just looking, I know there is a project that is being funded that's, I think, being housed at the Community Foundation in Santa Cruz, which is helping disadvantaged communities try to solve water and mostly drinking water issues. And I'll try to find a link to that and I'll post it or send it to you, Irma.
Thank
so
you.
I know that, you know, there is some monies coming through the state board for disadvantaged communities looking at water quality, mostly drinking water issues. A lot of it's targeting the Salinas Valley and the Central Valley around issues around nitrates.
Yeah. So Trout Unlimited and San Mateo County has been partnering with the RCD on those projects. So we work together on those, and so they were a partner on the domestic projects that I talked about earlier. Regarding the disadvantaged communities, actually somebody who I saw somewhere down here who's a guest today, not a panelist, who I think is really knowledgeable about this is Josh Hug from the Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District has taught me, and I think many others, a lot about Pescadero does not qualify as a disadvantaged community under the state standards, but there are other standards that he and others have been advocating may be used for vulnerable communities to be able to access some of those state funds and resources that are for disadvantaged communities. So I know that he's spoken a little bit about this with Sustainable Pescadero and with other groups. I listen to him each time, and I can't try to recreate that. And I think Irma Sue's hand is still up. I don't know if that's intentional.
Okay, I'm not seeing that. Sue, please go ahead with your question.
Yeah, it's on a little different thread, so you choose what to do with this. I was just wondering about that big earthquake that we're all expecting. Is that whole community going to be at a severe loss?
Could be.
Well, I guess we could say it depends. One thing about being distributed infrastructure is that maybe, you, unlike being a utility that's relying on a central plant that might get taken out, we each have our own. And but yes, if on shifts and the spring that you rely on is suddenly cut off from its source, or the aquifer collapses, those are going to be significant impacts for the community. Just looking at, for example, again, the public safety power shutoffs or the wildfires that cut us off from water. I'm one that, my well doesn't work without electricity, so I fill about a dozen blue barrels with water. So I always have a supply of water of 2 or 3 days water just for my livestock. So I think a lot of us in our go kits have much more water than perhaps someone who isn't as quite as worried about the infrastructure getting taken out.
And your sewage would be affected. That may be even just as bad, if not worse.
Possibly. And I guess that would be an interesting conversation for what are the most resilient systems as we're thinking about becoming more resilient communities. And as we experience more major weather events, what are the best investments that we can make in order to ensure that our community, everyone in our community, has the minimum essentials for shelter, which includes clean water and waste facilities.
So Sue, I will say in '89, after the Loma Prieta earthquake, we didn't see I didn't get a lot of calls out to look at septic systems, but I definitely got a lot of calls out on the small water systems. And the biggest impacts were the tanks. Mostly it was in water, where the water tanks that were damaged. It was a really vertical, the fault, the earthquake jumped, everything moved up and down, and all the tanks that were restrained were torn apart. All the tanks that were unrestrained, the pipes broke, but the tanks remained okay, So restraint, and I've been battling that battle with local fire chiefs about restraining tanks. But in any event, we didn't see a lot of impacts to septic systems, as that certainly didn't seem to come up after that earthquake.
The groundwater in the South Coast is so fractured and complex. Peter could speak to this much better than I could. That I think there's a lot of unpredictability about wells after different types of seismic events.
No, there was definitely some wells that were damaged too. Thanks, Calyx. It's a good point.
I see a question in the chat from Catherine. Catherine, did you want to go ahead and ask that directly?
I actually got a couple of answers. Evidently, there are systems that clean the water to the level that it could be released into the creek, giving us more fish. So maybe we should look at it from that standpoint. We've been looking at ways, trying to get a wastewater treatment system in town for multiple reasons. But if it cleans the water enough so that it could go back into the creek, then maybe there's a watershed benefit as well as a individual domestic benefit. So that's why I was asking that.
Yeah, Catherine, the water board recently adopted stream augmentation as a beneficial use of recycled water. It is a substantial work. It'd be a substantial amount of work to do it. It would take a lot of technical studies, and it would take a lot of buy-in from a lot of the environmental community and the state resource agencies to allow it. It's a federal permit as opposed to a state permit to go to a surface water discharge. So it's not, it's a pretty heavy lift. I mean, not to say you couldn't do it, but it will take a fair amount of study. I don't know, Calyx, if you guys have looked at that. Maybe you have.
Yeah, so we've looked at this for a few different things. One is for, in a couple of weeks, I think some folks in the community are going to see a version of a laundry facility that is piloting some of these concepts that we're talking about. And we helped with the sort of regulatory feasibility analysis of that and looked into it a bit. My sense, Catherine, is that as Catherine knows, NOAA on the RCD staff is starting to help figure some of this out. Part of it is to find out what is the driver, what is the need? Is the need about housing? Is it that there isn't enough water and a recycled water system is to make sure that you have water supply? Because sometimes I hear all these things about water quality. I'm like, but there isn't a bacterial problem. There isn't a water quality problem that needs to be fixed that we've seen in any significant way. I mean, your watershed has been regulated for sediment, but not for bacteria, because there isn't any chronic impairment or exceedances that we know of. In the surface water, I don't know that there's a big issue with nitrates either. There may be in some places in groundwater and not others. I'm not sure. So if what you're talking about is we need housing, and there is an adequate water supply, and so we want a closed water system for water supply so that we can have housing because there's enough water otherwise, then you're not really, what you're talking about isn't about discharge into the creek. You're talking about reuse. And that's a different, it depends like what the problem is that you're trying to solve. And I never lead with constraints. Any of you who knows me knows that's true. Start with your vision and then let's figure out how to get there. So like, I wouldn't lead with the constraints of whether or not it's really has a lot of, whether whoever they are in any given conversation is going to let us do it. Let's figure out what the community needs and what's the best way to do it, and then see whether or not it's got constraints. It's my recommendation.
Thank you. We have another couple of questions, just the last couple questions before we wrap up. I want to go up to Violet, I believe, from the CRC. There are families in East Palo Alto with a water supply from a well that is yellowish, so they buy bottled water for consumption while still paying for their water. Where can they go for help, and who can they ask for a water quality report? East Palo Alto, would that be RCD, Calyx, or who could they go to there?
I think that's a county question.
I think it's actually, they would have to go to, and I know that there's a lot of problems with that particular water district. And the LAFCO is going to do a municipal study review of the district, but I would also recommend going to the State Water Resources Control Board.
Yeah, you might want to go to environmental health to begin with, where they actually would probably have a better, may have an understanding of the actual ground, water supply issues. East Palo Alto has to be, they put out an annual report, consumer confidence report, and that should be identifying if there's some water quality problems. If it's on a site private well situation, then they probably should be reaching out to environmental health. I don't think the water board would have a lot of jurisdiction on an individual well. And it's in the San Francisco board, I find, is not very, they're very overwhelmed and not extremely timely in this sort of response.
I'm going to ask Josh to just very quickly explain the concept, the definition of a vulnerable or disadvantaged of community, and then we'll go ahead and wrap it up. So Josh, do you mind hopping in?
Sure. Yeah, so traditionally, and I'm a little curious to find out more about the experience with Prop 68 funds, because at least from our understanding, disadvantaged communities, Pescadero did not qualify. The traditional definition is 80% of the state median income, and the census tract where Pescadero resides did not qualify in that regard. And I emphasize state median as opposed to area median. It's a definition that the Central Valley and Southern California like, but high cost areas like the Bay Area get left out. So you do have a variety of others. You have something that Cal EPA put together called Cal Enviro Screen. It's a multi-factor model. Also, Pescadero is left out of that. The one that we're promoting right now is, I can put a link to it if it's a little technical, but Public Resources Code 71130 subsection G, called under-resourced communities. And it's actually 3 definitions in one. It's that 80% one, it's Cal Enviro Screen, and then it's area median income. And folks who are familiar with housing know about low-income housing. And it's the definition that constitutes that 80% of the area median income. And under that definition, Pescadero traditionally qualifies.
No.
Now, one of the other issues with that particular with the census tract where Pescadero is of course you have a lot of mixed incomes, and we've been seeing trends over the years of that disadvantaged community or under-resourced community shifting north to Half Moon Bay, and we don't know if it's more affluent people moving into that area or fewer lower income people in your census tract. So it's not a guarantee that you may qualify. I apologize if that's a little much to dump on you.
We're getting close to the top of, okay.
We actually did qualify for DAC about 7 years ago, where we found that the median income in the town was less than 48,000. Now, I don't know, maybe we just found all the right homes, but we did qualify.
If it's 7 years ago, it's possible.
We could get away with it then. We did. So after the county did that analysis, we basically like knocked on every door in Sacramento to use that. And it was pretty circuitous the way that we were able to get funds. And I'm not sure that we could pull that off again.
We tried to do that with CSA 7. We were not able to do it. So it's,
well, we're definitely actively working with legislators and Southern California stakeholders to get this under-resourced definition accepted into the climate bond under consideration. And there's a huge water component of that bond. It's between $4 and $6 billion, depending on the proposal. So we're hoping to, I guess the litmus tests that I see are East Palo Alto, North Fair Oaks, and Pescadero. Do those 3 communities qualify? And so far that gives you the best chance. There is another definition that you'll see increasingly popular called vulnerable populations or vulnerable communities. That one's still up for grabs. Cal OES through their state hazard mitigation plan does a good job with that analysis, and Pescadero qualifies under a variety of different scenarios.
And Josh, if they were to go after like a USDA, a rural development funding, they have, they're both loan plus their grant. I've worked with some communities like in the Big Sur area that managed to get grants. I was quite surprised.
These are federal grants.
They're federal grants. Yeah.
Right.
Have you looked at that, the eligibility of those?
I'm becoming more educated about that, but I understand, at least I understand they're a little more permissive than the state definitions.
Well, I do want to thank everyone again for joining us today. We have a couple more, just a couple wrap-up slides, and it sounds like our way forward is to talk about perhaps infrastructure and feasibility and ways to fund the improvements that we need. So we're hopeful that this perhaps has kicked off some movement, and we can come together, those of us who are interested in the topic, to continue across our community. I wanted to just take a couple of seconds to, in relation, going back to the earlier question about the earthquake, to let everyone know that the county has just kicked off the update process for their local hazard mitigation plan. And this is something that's done every 5 years. The mitigation plan looks at how the county can reduce its impact of natural hazards such as earthquakes, flooding, extreme heats, landslides, as well as human-caused risks. And once the reason the plan is so important is that it's what is used to determine eligibility for FEMA pre and post disaster mitigation grant funding, as well as other non-emergency disaster assistance programs like the new Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities program. So the process kicked off this week and will continue for the next several months. Next slide, please. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, next slide again. Sorry, I'm gonna skip that one. There's a great website that the county has that explains the plan and all the jurisdictions involved. There's also the first step that we're asking the public to take, and is to take a very short survey on the hazards that you've experienced in your location. This gives the county some general data about where hazards actually are. And then in the second phase of this planning process, we'll be holding public meetings and community workshops where we actually talk about what do we want the county's priorities to be to address the mitigation for these risks. So what do we as a community need? So if you sign up for our email list at Sustainable Pescadero, you'll get updates specific to the South Coast, or you can also sign up on the county's website and get updates and notices for activities that are going around the county-wide. This is, again, it's a process that will go on for April, May, June, July, and the plan is expected to be presented in August. So I highly encourage everyone to at least fill out the survey. Take a look at, and I'm going to go ahead and put that in these links in the chat so that you can have a say in the hazard mitigation plan for our county. Okay, next slide. And this is where we turn it back over to Petra and Doug.
Thank you so much, Irma, for doing a fantastic job facilitating and getting this amazing group together. And I want to let everyone know that a huge amount of information was just thrown at you, and especially a whole bunch of little things at the end that people might be interested in. We will be sending out a follow-up email with all of that so that you can, if you didn't get a chance to get to it, that you will receive it probably early next week. And on behalf of all of us at Thrive, we thank all of you for being here, especially the panelists. And we hope that this is a continuing conversation. This really was fascinating for those of us who don't live on the coast, I have to say, because it's such a different water system. But clearly there's a lot more to talk about. Everybody had to speak very quickly, and we look forward to continuing the conversation. So thank you so much for coming, and we will see you all soon.